Welcome to the Via Stoica Podcast. I'm Benny, and join me as we explore a Stoic way of life, one step at a time. I remember the moment quite well about 5 years ago when I was working in Dubai and I made the decision to leave. I was working a job that was quite good and it was quite easy for me to do. The money was good for what I was doing, especially coming from education, working in Spain before, and then moving to Dubai. But it still didn't feel like it was me. I was in the office, at that time I was writing exams and doing teacher trainings. And I looked around and I just, in my cubicle, and I had wonderful colleagues, but I also looked and saw all the other people just the same like me, with the same outfits, the men, and the same look, and commuting to the job every day. And I just realized, like, no, I hit the point where I needed to make the decision, and I left. I resigned and I moved away from Dubai. And that's been, the decision was made earlier, but it's been now about 4 years that I actually left there. And I have been living my life, with its ups and downs, and, the means were obviously a lot less because having quit that job and having to make money other ways, and obviously not as much. But I have to say that I've been living a lot freer and a lot more of myself. The good thing was that I had planned that exit a while before, right? After the divorce, I started to rethink my life and I started to look at how I wanted to live it and slowly start to work towards it. And this episode hopefully will help you to maybe make that decision as well, to look at that, to look ahead in the future, to see where you are and see, am I living the life that I want? Or are my wants and my desires keeping me trapped in a way that doesn't really feel like me? And maybe you're at the right place. Maybe you're doing exactly what you want. And this might be the affirmation that you are doing so. And great, happy for you. Or maybe you need to make small tweaks. And isn't something that is done overnight. As I said, I made a decision at one point, but that move has started long before, right? That move to work towards that moment to make the decision started before that. So I want to keep that in mind as well as we walk into this topic of wanting less but living more. We often get rolled into this life because of how we are raised and the expectations that we have. And no one really warns you, or even they do, but you don't want to listen to it in the moment. And I've had those moments myself as well, that you might get trapped in this cycle, right? In this life of needing to have a good salary, needing that promotion, needing to move ahead all the time, and kind of losing yourself in the process. And I didn't leave that job because it was difficult or hard. I left it because it just didn't align with who I was. And that is something that is really at the basis of making that decision. So one thing I wanted to ask you to just kind of think about, maybe pause this episode for a second if you need to write it down, or just sit with it or maybe you know the answer straight away. But what if money wasn't the issue? Because a lot of things that we do and spend our time on is to make money, right? To have that salary, to pay for the things that we want or think we need, and make our lives in such a way. But what if that wasn't an issue? What if money was solved and you had $1 million or even more, and that wasn't any problem for you? What would you do then with your life? It's maybe a cliche question, and people have asked it a lot, but I do think it's an important one because money is such an important factor in our lives. So what would you really buy? And think about it. Make a list. Like, I would buy a car. I would buy a big house. I would buy this. But then think about what that actually does for you. And maybe once you start making that list, look at the priorities of those things, the values that they give, and then think about what really matters to you. What would you really spend your money on and your time? And for me, when I ask myself that question, for me, the most important thing is that second part, my time. How can I make sure that I live my life in such a way that I can control and manage my time as best as possible? And keep in mind Stoicism as they look at time and the externals, that we can't control them. And I'm fully aware of it. But by reducing my wants and desires, I can have more say over it as I walk through life. And then fate can throw things at me, and then I might have to change. But at least I'm trying to make it as manageable for myself as I can. But think about that question. What if money wasn't an issue anymore? How would you really spend it? What would you buy? What would you get? What do you think is important for you? Because once we look at that, once we solve that, once we set our priorities and values in life, we can see that what we've been chasing might not have been important at all. And maybe we are already understanding this on a subconscious level, that we are not really doing what we're supposed to be doing, and that dissatisfaction carries along with it, right? We may be lacking the motivation of going to work because we can sense that it's not really useful or a meaningful way to spend our time. And then a lot of times it isn't big enough, right? That feeling isn't big enough for us to really make that change. It's that example of how to boil a frog. And I know this isn't really the nicest one to hear, but the saying goes that if you put a frog in boiling water, it jumps out. But if you put a frog in cold water and you slowly heat the water, then it stays in. And that's kind of what happens with us, because we expect to live in these societal norms and we slowly start to grind along. We have the education. Many of us then are packed with loans we need to pay back. So already in that rat race, caught up. And then we have to take on a job, and okay, it's nice. Maybe at the beginning it is exciting because you get the job that you wanted, but then you have to do the actual work, and you go for the promotions, and slowly but surely you are caught up in that stream of going down that path. And that might bring you to places where you don't want to go. So then we keep moving, we keep acquiring, we keep achieving, but yet the feeling of fulfillment is never reached. We are always kind of left with something more, right? And that's the feeling that we are trying to look into, that wanting more. And if we can really work with that, if we can really sit with that, we can start to live more. And that's really what we're looking for. One good way to examine this is to think about, where do these desires come from? And maybe listen to the episode I did on the discipline of desire. That's a really interesting part from Epictetus. Pierre Hadot really talks about it. It shows that we really have to focus on the desires that come internally. But a lot of them are brought to us from external sources. So that's why it's really good to examine them, is where do your desires come from? Do they come from comparison with your neighbors, with your friends, with your family? The highlight reels, the Instagram posts, all of these social media things, where do they come from? Why do you want what you think you want? And is it something you need, or is it something that you desire to have? We are conditioned to have a certain idea of what the good life looks like. And I've been talking to many people, and I've been hosting Stoic walks here now, currently in Granada. And it's really nice to talk about others regarding this question, what the good life looks like. And I would invite you to do the same, to just sit with your friends and ask them, hey, have you ever thought about what a good life is and what it looks like? And this was the main idea of Stoic, well, and not just Stoic philosophers, but Socrates, Plato, all of them were asking that question, what is a good life? And I guess we've kind of stopped asking it because it feels like we've been just spoon fed the answer of maybe, the big tech, big commerce, all of them wanting us to keep buying and consuming and really not think about these questions. So I would invite you to just take some friends and say, hey, what does it look like to you? Can we just have a debate about it and see what really matters? Because that conditioning leads us away from who we might authentically be and how we want to live. And that creates these habits of us wanting to do things, right? That we really connect the idea of a good life with success, with money, with fame, with whatever, right? But they're all externals. And instead, as the Stoics say, we need to try to connect it with our soul, our character, how we are as a human being and how we are living. So the real question remains is like, how many of your desires, of your wants, did you really choose? How many of them are really yours and not someone else's? Again, this is something to sit with, maybe with some friends, think about it for a while. But one thing that usually happens is that we hit this wall. I've hit it. And for me, it was, again, with the divorce, but also with my knee injury and with my alcohol issues and other things as well, and with work. And as I said at the beginning, that example of me being at work and just sitting, looking around, and suddenly it hit me. It's like, what am I doing? In that commute every day with hundreds of thousands of people going to work, going back, that same flow and ebb and flow. And I was like, and what am I actually doing? What am I producing? Am I actually helping people? Am I doing something that makes me feel useful or meaningful? And the answer was no, but it took that wall to hit. And that might be too late for some, because then you don't see where you can go, what changes are possible, because you want them to happen quickly, right? You want them to happen right now because you're fed up, you don't feel good anymore. And sometimes that feels too late, but it is the beginning. And it's not about reaching that endpoint when you hit that point. It's about making those small changes. It's about making that change within your mind to say, you know what? This is where I am right now. I hit the wall. Let me move towards a better life in the pace that is possible, right? You might not be able to give up your job quickly or right away, but you can make changes in your life outside of that to work towards it. And that world can be a burnout, can be a loss, like I mentioned, in my life. It can be a moment where the life you build just stops working because fate has other plans. But it can also be something slower, right? That feeling of being trapped, maybe of having to sign another contract, maybe of having to look for a new lease for a house for I don't know what kind of period, or maybe that promotion that you've always wanted. And then it's there. And suddenly you see what it really entails, how much time you really have to put in, all the responsibilities and all the extra meaningless work for you, right, that you have to do. And let's be honest, that job, that cage that we're in, is usually the most comfortable. Making those changes is uncomfortable and can be scary because you know what you have right now. But if it doesn't feel who you are, then you're just going to stay stuck there and be more and more unhappy. And we're talking about, work now or and money, but it could also be on other parts of your life. So examine it widely. And maybe it's not as catastrophic as, I paint here because it's also good to illustrate the idea. Maybe it's just small details that you're facing with. But it's worth thinking about. It's worth looking into and examining your life. And maybe you haven't hit the wall yet. Maybe you don't even see it coming, but it is worth looking at and listening to. Using your reason and logic, examining things, but also listening to your instinct and listening to your feelings about it. And to do so, we have to put an honest mirror in front of us. A mirror that isn't always as happy or as friendly with us, that sometimes paints a picture that we might not want to see, but it is one of truth. It is one that we need to look at. It holds the things that we are chasing for, like the promotion, the car, the house, puts them in the light and shows them what they tell us about ourselves. And this isn't something about making harsh cuts or having more discipline. This is really about learning more about who you are. It's about noticing whether you are living someone else's lives according to those desires, or are you actually doing it for you? And once you do, you can see that that mirror becomes clearer and you start to see yourself. And you will notice that you are already far further ahead and closer to where you want to be than you might think. And if we do one more exercise, think about the things that you were chasing maybe 2 years ago, that promotion, that car, all of those things that you wanted to have. Are you still that satisfied with them? Maybe the things that you bought, you don't even know where they are anymore, or maybe they're long gone. Think about how they really impacted your life. And then think back about what has changed your life, what has given you a sense of fulfillment, of satisfaction. Maybe it is having your family close. Maybe it is about having a hobby with friends that you do. All of those things can give you far more satisfaction than the things that we intend to want. And when we think back at that $1 million question, maybe you don't need as much money as you thought you needed to live a good life. You just need to live as if you've already have it, as if you've already answered the question. Because I can tell you from my experiences that we don't need any near the money amount that we think we need to live the life that we want. Because life is really lived in the present, and that's what the Stoic reminds us of. Marcus Aurelius tells himself that if he eats the fanciest foods, the bigger, the most expensive and best wines, he just tells himself, this is fermented grape juice. This is meat of a dead animal. Think about your car. It's just a vehicle of metal and whatever it is to bring you from A to B. And what could it give you if you reduced in those expenses? How would you then spend your time? How would you then use it? And maybe you can pick one desire or one thing this week that keeps you from making authentic choices and how you would really love to spend your time, maybe by going for a walk or maybe by reading a book or some of the things that you've always said you wanted to do but never got around to because other things keep you occupied. Think about that for a second as well. What is the desire this week? What is really taking me away from spending the time that I want to spend it? How can I live more when I reduce those parts? And when we make those changes, we might not reach the life exactly as we had in mind. And maybe that's not even the what really matters. It's about living more with awareness, asking ourselves those questions that we've been looking at, and then seeing that in every present moment, I can make decisions that are more aligned with who I am. And yes, I might still be working here or there. I still might be doing the things that I prefer not to be doing. But in that moment, we can still even make those decisions that feel closer to who we are. And I left Dubai not knowing what would come next, and it took me a long while to figure out. And I'm still doing that. It's like a river; it keeps flowing. And I don't think we want to reach that end. At least not now. At least not while we're full in life. But I knew that it was the right decision. I knew that it was true because one of the questions that people ask me is like, how do you know? What do you use as a guide? And when I think about my decisions and when I project them in the future, I feel or I ask myself, would that give me more calm and peace? And that doesn't always mean to be more comfortable, but it does mean that it feels like this is the right thing for me to do. And sometimes I make mistakes, sometimes I need to adjust it later on, but at least it feels like it's in the good direction. And that is the compass that we need to be using. This doesn't mean that you can't want anything. It just means that we want to make sure that you are more aware of what it is that you actually want. So the wanting less might be phrased more as the wanting more authentic you and then living according to that and living more. So thank you for listening. We would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the podcast. And if you have questions or if you struggle with things or if you just have different views on this topic, please leave a comment. I always appreciate it and I will get back to it as soon as I can. But for now, thank you very much for listening and we hope to see you in the next one.